Hello, welcome to week 5 of MPAI 600 here at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. Just want to start off with announcements. The only real announcements, as I mentioned last year, we're going to have a Capitol Hill walkthrough on November 15th at 8:30 p.m. at night. We will meet at the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial at 8:30 p.m. If you are going to make it, please in this announcement reply back that yes, you'll make it, and reply back with your phone number as well, because I want to have a kind of a text chat going with my current in-person students as well as the students that want to come in from the online class. So review of week 4. Again, I know there's a lot of week 4, and I'm going to talk about the paper in a second, but I want to hit the high points for week 4. So obviously we had the Iraq WMD. And there was failures along the chain. There was failures in collection, and the curveball documentary that you saw really, really highlights that. You can also argue that the fact that we did not have a lot of collection assets, almost zero after inspectors left, was also a pretty glaring collection failure. There was analytical failures, and I went over those in depth, but you had biases. You had negative evidence or failure to look at negative evidence. You had groupthink. You had confirmation bias. You had the inability to look back at lines of analysis and look back them and adjust them based on new information. And then you had organizational failures. Arguably, if you can have all the counterfactual analysis and all the red teaming and all the different aspects of it, but if George Tenet says it's a slam dunk case and he is the one person that communicates to the key decision makers, then all that red teaming and devil's advocacy and all those other analytical points are out the window. And that's an organizational failure. If all your organization depends on the biases of one person, that is a failure in organization. And then finally, the policy interface. The Rachel Maddow documentary goes into it in pretty big detail, so I don't want to hit on those issues too much. Then you had 9/11. I argue was 9/11 an intelligence failure. I argue again because of those organizational failures that we knew. Our government knew that 2 people were on watch lists and had visas and were in the United States and were communicating with a known bin Laden safe house. We knew that, but that information was not relayed to the right people that can actually take action on that. That is an organizational failure, according to that matrix that I talked about. I asked what to do if you get the memo, bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S., or you brief that and somebody asks, bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S., the answer for most of the intelligence community is, well, the operations folks will take care of that, or the cabinet secretaries, or whatever agency director. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think you have to go in with recommendations and say, Mr. President, we have this intelligence says bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S. My recommendation is to do X. Either maybe do nothing, continue to monitor, or maybe, Mr. President, we need to have a review led by you so we can shake every tree and look at potential intelligence that might be out there. Leadership at your level might inspire that. So you have to go in with those types of recommendations. And then I talked about the organizational issues discussed in depth in the NSA documentary. And then I would just ask, based on the National Geographic documentary, I ask where along the chain of command could have a 9/11-like event have been stopped. And I outline all the things that you need to have a 9/11, whether it's sanctuary in Afghanistan, to free access to the United States, to free access to the cockpits. Could there have been a break in that chain that could have prevented a 9/11? And that's the question I ask. I ask of you, and I also ask, is a 9/11 still possible now? And I'll let you decide. So, paper 2. I got some questions on this, and I wanted to give the guidance here. I didn't want to get this too early because I want you to actually do the week-to-week discussions and then focus on the paper this week. As you saw, it's about, again, 1,500 words if you're writing the paper with focus on one of the case studies we talked about earlier. If you're doing a presentation, if you're groups 1, 2, and 3, about a 20-minute presentation, again, due next Sunday, PowerPoint presentation that covers many of the issues that I'm about to talk about now and that what you see in the Canvas. And it's under Module 5. I just want to emphasize that. It's under Module 5, the actual guidance for the paper. But I'm going to give you a little bit more guidance here as well. So, paper 2, strategic paper, will allow you to choose intelligence issue or use multiple case studies. What I mean by an intelligence issue is you can choose a case study, one of the ones that we've talked about in the class. You can choose one that we haven't talked about. Please let me know beforehand. Or you can choose an issue that winds its way through several case studies, whether that's groupthink, negative evidence, failures in collection, policy interface. You can choose one of those issues and talk about how that was visible in multiple case studies. So I'll let you choose that. What I do not want you to do is just list every single Intel failure pathology for one of your case studies. I do not want the Yom Kippur War was a result of 15 failures in everything from collection to requirements to policy interface. I do not want that. I do not want that. I want you to choose one or maybe two maximum issues and explain why that was the primary driver for the failure. Please do not give me laundry lists. I cannot emphasize that enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a laundry list right here of all the issues and all the potential topics. Do not just recite this laundry list. Choose one of these issues or choose an issue that you want to come up with and expound on it. So failures in collection. Pearl Harbor, Yom Kippur War, Iraq War. So Pearl Harbor, the fact that we did not know where the adversary's critical strategic asset. Arguably, that's a failure in collection. The Yom Kippur War, the reliance and over-reliance on one human source, Marwan, and how that cascaded through the intelligence failure is a potential topic. And the Iraq War, I just mentioned the curveball issue. Failures in analysis. Again, Pearl Harbor had all sorts of groupthink, had all sorts of really, arguably racist analysis about how the Japanese could not conduct a six-carrier strike because of various issues within the Japanese race. That's a failure in analysis, arguably a racist failure as well, but I'll let you decide. The confessions, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. You saw everything from negative evidence to groupthink to confirmation bias to clientelism all contribute to that arrest or that false arrest of those Navy sailors. Those are arguably failures in analysis. And then Iraq WMD, I just went and talked about groupthink and negative evidence and other failures in analysis. Politicization, Iraq WMD. Don't need to expound on that anymore. You just had that. The confessions, arguably the inability to, the clientelism, the pressures on detectives to get the case forced a wrongful conviction. And finally, on 9/11, the DAL goes into detail that the information was not presented in a way that would be receptive to policymakers. You could argue that's the politicization or policy interface failure regarding 9/11. Organization. This is the boxes aren't talking to each other. I just talked about 9/11 and the NSA documentary. Pearl Harbor. At the federal level, information was collected, but it was not disseminated down to the commanders on the ground. That's an organizational failure. The commanders couldn't take action on it because they didn't know the critical intelligence that was being collected. And then finally, the fusion centers. Again, you can make the argument that if you want in your papers, that information is not being collected vertically or disseminated vertically. The fusion centers are supposed to stop that. Whether that's happening or not is up to you to write about. So there's plenty to choose from here. As I mentioned, do not do laundry lists. Do not do laundry lists. So again, the presentation is next Sunday. Plan for 20 minutes to brief, another 10 minutes for questions for PowerPoint presentations, and the rest of you will have your paper to write. If there's issues, let me know. We can talk by email, we can talk on the phone, we can Skype or Zoom. So please, if there's questions, let me know. Don't wait till Sunday to give me, I have no idea what I'm doing kind of answer. That's a failure on your part if you choose to do this at the last minute. So unfortunately or fortunately, we have to continue because it's a 7.5-week course. If you're doing this 15 weeks, I'll give you the entire week to come up with a paper. But week 5, we talk about counterterrorism case studies. We look at Fort Hood, underwear bomber, Boston, and the European Union. The readings are on Fort Hood shooting, the Boston Marathon, and then a couple of great documentaries. Please watch the documentaries. And the question is, why do we still have these failures? Despite the millions, billions, trillions, depending on how you count it, resources, why do we still have the failures that you're going to see in your reading? My recommendation is to do the paper. Start the paper now while it's fresh and you've got those ideas in your mind. Write a draft, set it aside. Do the week 5 documentaries. Again, it's very documentary heavy, so you can, and all the documentaries are mostly family friendly. So you can watch the documentaries, do some of the readings, start the discussions, and then return back to editing your paper. That's the best way, I think, to approach this week. So if there's questions or issues, let me know, and I look forward to your question. I look forward to seeing you guys in live next week.